Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Profiles, where 4 days a week we're going to review a specific card, and then on Fridays we're going to profile a deck. These are not necessarily the best or the worst cards, we just discuss the different utilities of the cards to help players brainstorm or to pick unique tech choices. So the first card we're going to do is Forced Requisition. Now what this card does is you can activate this card when you discard from your hand. Every time you discard from your hand, your opponent must also discard the same number of cards from his or her hand. Okay, so it's a continuous trap, which is probably the worst thing about it. If this was a spell, you could really activate this turn 1 with specific decks that do a lot of discarding and take advantage of the rule very early. However, you have to wait a turn to activate it. Now the thing about this card is it doesn't care why you discard. It can be cost, effect, game mechanic, it doesn't matter. If you end your turn with 12 cards in your hand and you have this on board, you're going to discard 6 and your opponent's not going to have anything in hand. So the decks where this card is going to be most viable are going to be Fabled and Dark World. Obviously these two decks focus a lot on discarding. I actually run this card in my Dark World build. Okay, so you're going to be running cards like Dark World Dealings or Gauge of the Dark World, and every time you discard, you're going to draw, you're going to plus, and your opponent is also going to discard one of their cards. One of the better combinations I found with running Forced Requisition in either one of these decks is Dark Smog. Okay, Dark Smog for these two decks obviously gives you an unlimited discard outlet once per turn, and it's a trap, so it's supposed to be 2, therefore once per turn during either player's turn, you can use this effect. And this effect is, you can discard one Fiend-type monster from your hand to banish one card from your... Actually, it's banish one monster from your opponent's graveyard. So, you can use this card during your opponent's draw phase every turn in conjunction with Forced Requisition if they have no cards in hand, to keep them with no cards in hand. So if your opponent draws during their draw phase, you use Dark Smog effect, discard a Fiend, banish a monster from their grave, and then Forced Requisition will make them discard the only card in their hand, which is going to generate continuous advantage for you. Another good combination with this card is going to be Morphing Jar, and then Card Destruction. Even though Card Destruction is currently banned in this format, I imagine it won't stay that way for long. But either way, you know, or if you're playing traditional, which if you are playing traditional, there's going to be better choices than Forced Requisition anyway. But because Forced Requisition cannot interrupt the effects of these two cards, like Card Destruction, you can't discard your card. Forced Requisition, step in, take effect, you don't have any cards to discard, and then you draw. It doesn't work like that. So when I activate Card Destruction, and I discard 4 cards, for example, after my opponent and I draw our cards that we discard, they're going to have to discard the same amount of cards I drew at the beginning of the effect of Card Destruction because of Forced Requisition. Same thing with Morphing Jar. Okay, so if I flip Morphing Jar and I have X amount of cards in hand, after we both draw 5, if Forced Requisition is on the board, they have to discard the amount of cards I discarded. So it's a really easy way with either one of these two cards to clear out their hand in one go. Some other decks that might be able to utilize this card would be Mermails. They all discard in one way or the other. You've got Abystius, you've got Megalo, you've got Lead, which Lead you're not going to utilize too often. You've got Pike. All these monsters discard to use their effects, and you plus off that. So the ability to not only plus off all their effects, to special summon them or to search, you're making your opponent discard at the same time. Okay, so it's just a different tech for Mermails if you want to take that route. Another one that was better last format than it is now is Dragon Rulers. Now that the babies are banned, you're not going to be discarding quite as much. You know, I've seen people teching in Divine Wrath, Phoenix Windblast, Regeki Break, whatever. And that's another example of where Forced Requisition would be good, because you're going to discard, you're going to blow up a card or return a card, and then they still have to discard from hand. I don't think those cards really justify Forced Requisition in and of themselves. But, you know, if you are running Dragon Rulers and you are maybe playing traditional, or you're happen to find yourself in using a build where you do use their discard effects more often, like Tempest would be, discard him and another one to search for a dragon, then it could be utilized, but I think this is probably a stretch for the card. And like I just mentioned, Regeki Break, Divine Wrath, if you're running in excess of cards like this that are going to discard, then, it could be a good addition to the deck. Now, nobody's going to run a lot of these if you're a good player. Just options to think about. And like these two cards, if you are running Dragon Rulers and you're playing a build with Dragon Ravine, Force Requisition would also fit in really well there, because each turn with Dragon Ravine, you're going to be pitching a Dragon Ruler to put another dragon in grave. Just to kind of thin out the deck, but every time you do that, your opponent's also going to discard 1, 2. So it's just going to allow you to gain advantage over your opponent. And then one of the last things is going to be any of these generic cards that are discard 1, whatever, draw 2. You're going to be able to discard from your opponent's hand also. So, I could play cards of consonants, discard Dragunity Corseska, draw 2, and then my opponent's also going to have to discard 1. In my opinion, this isn't really going to be a viable play either, just because, at max you're going to run 3 trade-in or 3 cards or 3 of whatever generic card you are using, and that's not really enough to justify the Force Requisition. Like I said, the best utility Force Requisition is going to have is probably going to be in Dark Worlds. Okay, I run always 1, maybe 2 in my Dark World build, just because the Dark Smog Lock is so convenient. And, if I don't explode turn 1, if I can set up a defense, if I can go Tour Guide and make a Zen Mains and set the Force Requisition and sit a turn, the next turn I can activate my Force Requisition and then proceed to make, a couple plays, drag down into Dark World dealings, into Gates of the Dark World, whatever. And then at that point, I can knock, depending on how many cards my opponent played during their turn, I can knock them down to 0. And then if I come into a Dark Smog, I'm going to retain constant advantage as long as I have a Fiend to discard. But, yep, that's Force Requisition. We'll see you guys tomorrow.